You ever stop and wonder why the milk in your fridge probably comes from a farm just outside the city, but the beef for your burger might have traveled hundreds of miles? Well, believe it or not, the answer might just be in a 200-year-old idea. Today, we are going to unpack the von Thünen model, a really cool framework that explains the secret geography of pretty much everything we eat.
Okay, so to get our heads around this, let's start with a question we can all relate to. Why is a tiny apartment in the city center crazy expensive while a huge house out in the burbs costs way less? I mean, it's a trade-off, right? You're either paying for access and convenience, or you're paying for space and quiet. Can't really have it all. So, believe it or not, farmers are facing that exact same dilemma. If a farmer wants land right near the market, sure, the land's going to cost a fortune, but they'll save a ton on transport. On the other hand, if they set up shop way out in the countryside, the land is super cheap, but now they've got to spend a whole lot more just to get their products into the city.
Right, so this is what we're talking about, the farmer's two-cost problem. It's this constant balancing act, right? Juggling the cost of the land with the cost of transportation, all to try and make the most profit. And that is the absolute core problem that the von Thünen model tries to figure out.
And the economic idea that makes this whole thing tick? It's called bid rent theory, and it's actually pretty simple. Just think of it like an auction. All these different farmers are bidding for land. So a dairy farmer, whose milk has to get to the market super fast before it spoils, can afford to bid way more for that land right next to the city. But a cattle rancher? They need tons of cheap space, so they're totally fine bidding less for land way, way out there.
All right, so now that we've got that idea down, let's actually build this thing. Let's see how this guy, Johann von Thünen, used that logic to create his perfect farm world, starting from the city and working our way out. So what he pictured was this central city, and around it, like a bullseye, 4 perfect rings of different kinds of farming. The very first ring, hugging the city, that's for dairy and market gardens. Just outside that, a ring of forests. Then a massive ring for field crops, like wheat and corn, and way out on the edge, the final ring, ranching and livestock. It looks really neat and tidy, right? But the real question is, why that specific order? And here's the beautiful logic behind it all. It really comes down to 2 things: how fast something spoils and how much it costs to move. So ring 1, with the milk and veggies, that has to be right next to the city, because that stuff goes bad fast. Ring 2, the forests, this one sounds a little weird to us now, but back in the 1800s, wood was crucial for fuel and building, and it is incredibly heavy and expensive to haul around, so you wanted it close. Ring 3, the grains, they're way lighter and they last a lot longer, so they can be further out. And ring 4, the livestock, well, this is kind of brilliant. They need huge amounts of cheap land, and they can walk themselves to market. No shipping costs. I mean, it's such a beautifully logical system, isn't it? Almost a little too perfect. And that's the catch. Because for this whole thing to work, von Thünen had to basically invent a perfect world that doesn't really exist.
Yeah, he had to make some pretty massive assumptions. First off, he pictured something called an isotropic plain, which is just a fancy way of saying a completely flat, featureless landscape. No rivers, no mountains, nothing to mess things up. He also imagined a single city, totally isolated, with no trade from the outside, and that everyone used the same kind of transportation, and that the climate and soil were identical everywhere, which, of course, is not how the real world works at all.
But probably his biggest assumption, the one that really shaped everything, was about technology. You see, his entire model was built around the slow, plodding, expensive reality of an ox cart. When that's how you're moving things, every single extra mile is a huge cost, both in time and money. Distance becomes the absolute king of all factors.
But then, what happens when you throw this into the mix? Refrigerated trucks, planes, ships. We call them cool chains. And suddenly, things that are super perishable, like berries or milk from halfway around the globe, can show up totally fresh in your supermarket. This technology alone seems to just completely shatter the logic of that first ring, right?
And it's not just that. There are plenty of other 21st century disruptions. We live in a globalized world, not some isolated little city-state. Sometimes climate is way more important than distance. I mean, think about avocados grown in Mexico's perfect climate and shipped literally everywhere. Plus, you've got government subsidies and all sorts of policies that can completely change what farmers decide to plant. So, with all that, is this 200-year-old model just some dusty old idea that doesn't matter anymore? Well, you might be surprised. The answer is not at all. It turns out that if you just zoom out or zoom in, If you just change your scale, the basic logic of the model is actually still hiding in plain sight, everywhere you look. Okay, let's zoom out and look at a map of the United States. Where's the traditional dairy belt? It's clustered in the Northeast and around the Great Lakes, right next to the country's oldest, biggest cities. That's a perfect ring 1. Now, where's the corn belt and all the grain? The Midwest. That's basically ring 3. And cattle ranching? It's way out west on that vast, cheaper land. That's ring 4. See? The logic is still there. It's just playing out on a massive continental scale.
And we can also zoom way, way in. Think about your local farmer's market. I mean, what is that if not a perfect, miniature, modern-day von Thünen model? You've got all these producers located super close to the city market, and their whole selling point is freshness, perishable goods with the shortest possible transport time. It's the model in action, right in your neighborhood.
So, what's the big takeaway from all this? Why are we even talking about this old kind of simplistic map of farming? Why does it still matter? Well, it matters because even though this idea is about 200 years old, the core economic force it identified, that constant push and pull between the cost of land and the cost of transport, that battle is absolutely timeless.
Look, at the end of the day, our modern technology might have stretched those rings, warped them, and pulled them across oceans, but it hasn't actually broken their underlying logic. These invisible forces of distance and cost, they're still shaping the world we eat every single day, from the global food system all the way down to the tomatoes at your local market.
And that kind of leaves us with one last thing to think about. As our cities keep growing and our technology keeps changing in ways we can't even predict, how are these rings going to shift next? What will the map of our food look like in another 200 years? Whatever the answer is, you can bet it'll still come down to that same simple, powerful balance between land and logistics.